The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Maplewood Elementary, casting long, soft shadows across the polished floors. Students moved in clusters down the hall, their chatter mixing with the sharp echo of footsteps. Among them, 12-year-old Maya walked quietly, clutching her backpack straps tightly. She was a shy girl, careful with her words and cautious with her actions. Her dark eyes flickered nervously toward the new teacher's classroom, the one everyone had been whispering about since the beginning of the school year. Her friends had warned her. "Be careful with Ms. Hardwick," one had said. "She's strict. Really strict. Don't even think about breaking the rules." Maya had nodded, trying to hide the unease she felt settling like a stone in her stomach. But deep down, she had no idea what strict really meant, not until today. The classroom door loomed ahead, tall and imposing. Through the small glass window, she could see the teacher, Ms. Hardwick, standing perfectly still at the front. Her posture was rigid, her eyes sharp, scanning the students who were beginning to take their seats. Maya's heart beat faster. There was something about the way Ms. Hardwick moved, like a predator quietly assessing her surroundings. It wasn't anger yet, not quite, but it carried a weight that made Maya's stomach twist. As she walked in, Maya noticed the other students whispering nervously to each other, some glancing toward her as if to warn her silently. The air felt heavier in the room, thick with anticipation, though no one had said a word yet. Maya tried to shake off the feeling. She was just going to sit quietly, pay attention, and do her best to get through the morning. That had always been her way, stay out of trouble and keep a low profile. But somehow, that didn't feel like it would be enough today. Ms. Hardwick's voice cut through the murmurs, low and firm. "Take your seats. Now." The words carried a sharp edge, precise and unforgiving. There was no warmth in the tone, no softness to reassure the students that they were simply beginning another school day. Maya felt her hands tighten around her backpack straps, her knuckles widening. She hurried to her desk, her mind racing with all the things she had to remember. Don't speak out of turn. Don't fidget. Don't make a sound that could be considered wrong. The first few minutes passed in tense silence. Ms. Hardwick handed out assignments, her gaze sweeping across the room, catching even the smallest misstep. Maya wrote diligently, trying to focus, but her eyes kept flicking up to watch the teacher. Every glance felt like an examination. She noticed the way Ms. Hardwick's lips pressed together whenever a student whispered, the way her hand tapped impatiently against the desk. There was a sense that even the smallest mistake could trigger a storm Maya could not yet predict, but one she instinctively feared. Outside the classroom window, a bird sang cheerfully, oblivious to the tension inside. Maya's mind momentarily wandered to simpler thoughts, the playground swings, her dog waiting at home, the quiet comfort of her bedroom. But the sound of Ms. Hardwick's voice pulled her back abruptly. "Maya Collins," she said, her tone sharp and deliberate. "Stand up." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what she had done wrong, but she obeyed immediately, standing with trembling legs. Her classmates' eyes were on her, some wide with curiosity, others with thinly veiled fear. The room felt suddenly colder, the chatter of the outside world gone, leaving only the tense silence and the teacher's piercing gaze. "Do you understand the rules of this classroom?" Ms. Hardwick asked, her eyes locking onto Maya's. The words seemed simple, but the weight behind them was crushing. Maya nodded quickly, hoping that was enough. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She felt small, exposed, like a character in a story she had no control over. The teacher's lips pressed together tightly, and for a moment, Maya thought the moment had passed. Maybe she had escaped punishment. But then Ms. Hardwick's gaze sharpened further, as if she had just spotted a flaw in Maya's very being. The tension in the room grew, and Maya could feel every eye in the classroom on her. The next hour dragged on with agonizing slowness. Each time Maya shifted in her seat, Ms. Hardwick's eyes followed, tracking every movement, every breath. Maya tried to focus on the assignment in front of her, her pencil scratching against the paper, but her thoughts kept returning to the earlier warning, the fear that something terrible could happen at any moment. The students around her seemed equally tense, some glancing nervously at the teacher, others staring straight ahead, frozen in apprehension. During a break, Maya's friend leaned over and whispered, "Be careful. She's looking for someone to punish. I think she's waiting for the right moment." Maya's stomach tightened even further. Waiting for the right moment. The words replayed in her mind like a drumbeat she could not escape. She wanted to run, to hide, but there was no escape. Not yet. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the class, Maya felt a small sense of relief. Maybe she had survived the morning unscathed. But as she packed her books slowly, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The air seemed charged, almost electric, and she noticed other students moving hesitantly, glancing at Ms. Hardwick with caution bordering on fear. After lunch, as students filed back into the classroom, the door clicked behind them. Ms. Hardwick was standing there, waiting. She did not smile. She did not greet them. She simply watched, her gaze scanning each student like a hawk circling its prey. Maya felt her chest tighten, a low hum of anxiety vibrating through her body. There was no way to prepare for whatever was coming next, but she knew instinctively that her life, even if only for this day, was about to change. A sudden noise at the back of the classroom, a dropped pencil, a cough, made Ms. Hardwick's eyes flash with irritation. The room went silent immediately. Maya felt herself shrinking in her seat, wishing she could disappear. She could sense that the moment of reckoning was near, though she did not yet understand what would happen. Her heart raced. Every muscle in her body was tense. Every nerve on edge. And then, Ms. Hardwick spoke. Not a question, not a warning, but a statement that cut through the room like ice. "Maya Collins, come to the front." Maya froze. Her mouth went dry. She could hear the faint whispers of classmates, their eyes wide with anticipation. She knew that whatever happened next would be significant, unforgettable. The suspense hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, wrapping around every student like a thick fog. She stood slowly, her legs trembling. The world seemed to shrink around her, leaving only the teacher, her own fear, and the curious, anxious faces of her classmates. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, trying to hold on to any shred of courage she had left. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. As she walked toward the front of the classroom, Maya could feel her heart pounding, each step heavier than the last. Every eye followed her, every whisper of her classmates reaching her ears like a distant storm. The teacher's presence was overwhelming, a shadow that seemed to fill the room entirely. Maya's mind raced with questions, with fears, with silent pleas for mercy. She did not know what awaited her, but the suspense, the tension, the quiet dread, all made it clear, today, something unforgettable was about to happen. The classroom seemed to shrink around Maya as she stepped closer to the front. Every step felt heavier than the last, her backpack dragging like a weight of invisible chains. Ms. Hardwick's eyes followed her, sharp and cold, calculating every movement. Maya could hear the faint rustle of papers, the nervous breaths of her classmates, and her own heartbeat, loud and unsteady, echoing in her ears. "Maya Collins," the teacher said, her voice low and deliberate. "Do you know why you are here?" Maya shook her head slightly, trying to find the right words. I think I broke a rule, ma'am." Her voice trembled, thin and fragile. The teacher's lips pressed into a hard line. "You think? That is not enough. You are always late to class. You are careless with your assignments. You disrupt the classroom." Each word landed like a hammer, precise and cruel. Maya's stomach twisted. She had been careful, she had tried so hard to follow the rules. And yet, here she was, standing in front of everyone, exposed and vulnerable. Her classmates sat frozen, watching. Some looked shocked, others whispered silently, but no one dared speak. Maya felt a rising heat in her cheeks, a tight knot forming in her throat. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into the floor, to escape the terrifying weight of the teacher's gaze. Ms. Hardwick reached for something on her desk, a pair of shiny scissors. The metallic glint caught the sunlight streaming through the windows, reflecting sharply into Maya's eyes. A cold wave of fear ran down her spine. The scissors were small, but in that moment, they felt enormous, threatening, dangerous. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She instinctively stepped back, but the teacher blocked her path with a slow, deliberate movement. "You will learn discipline today," she said, her voice low but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Sometimes words are not enough. The classroom held its collective breath. The tension was unbearable, pressing against every chest. Maya's mind raced desperately. What had she done to deserve this? What could she possibly do to make it stop? She wished for an adult, a savior, anyone to intervene. But the principal was in her office, and the other teachers were busy. She was alone. Ms. Hardwick's hand moved toward Maya's head. The students gasped softly, but no one moved to stop her. Maya tried to shrink away, her small frame trembling under the looming presence of the teacher. She whispered, barely audible, "Please, don't," but the words faded, swallowed by the heavy silence of the room. And then it happened. The sharp snip of the scissors cut through the tense air. Maya felt a sudden sting as a small patch of her hair fell to the floor. She froze, unable to process what was happening. Her classmates' eyes widened in shock. Some covered their mouths, others stared in disbelief. The teacher's hands were steady, precise, removing more hair with cold calculation. Maya's heart raced faster than ever, pounding so loudly it drowned out all other sounds. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but her legs refused to move. The humiliation, the fear, and the helplessness were overwhelming. She felt the weight of every stare in the room pressing down on her like a physical force. A low murmur spread across the classroom. Why is she doing this?" someone whispered. Another student shook their head silently, disbelief written all over their face. Maya's friend reached out, trying to offer comfort, but the teacher's glare stopped her. Even small gestures of support were dangerous now. Maya felt her hair being pulled slightly, another snip, and then another. Each sound of the scissors slicing through her hair was like a drumbeat of dread, marking time in a nightmare she could not wake from. The fear inside her grew, mixing with humiliation and disbelief. How could this be happening? How could a teacher, someone meant to protect and guide, treat her like this, in front of everyone? The teacher paused for a moment, holding Maya's hair in her hand. The room was silent, each student frozen in a mixture of fear and disbelief. Maya's mind was spinning. She felt tears streaking down her cheeks, hot and fast, but she didn't make a sound. The shame, the confusion, the helplessness, they all collided in her chest, making it hard to breathe. Suddenly, a voice from the back of the room whispered, barely audibly, "Stop, this isn't right." It was small, tentative, but it broke the spell for a moment. Ms. Hardwick's eyes flicked toward the voice, and for a brief second, a hint of irritation crossed her face. But then, just as quickly, it hardened again. Maya could feel her world narrowing to the teacher, the scissors, and the growing pile of hair at her feet. Every thought, every hope, every ounce of courage she had, seemed to vanish in the shadow of what was happening. She wanted to cry out, to beg, to disappear, but the fear of punishment kept her silent. The teacher finally set the scissors down, surveying her work. The classroom was deathly quiet, the only sound the soft whimpering of Maya as she clutched at her uneven hair. Ms. Hardwick's expression was unreadable, almost satisfied in the execution of her version of discipline. Maya's friends slowly gathered around her, offering whispered words of comfort, but she barely heard them. The shame, the pain, and the shock were too intense. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into the floorboards, to escape the stares of everyone who had watched her being humiliated. And then, just as the teacher turned to leave, a voice called from the doorway. "Maya, what is going on here?" The room froze again. Maya's heart leaped into her throat. That voice, calm but firm, carried authority. It was her mother. Ms. Hardwick froze mid-step, her hand hovering in the air, the scissors still in her grip. Her eyes widened as she turned slowly, her lips pressing together tightly. Maya felt a sudden flicker of hope, a spark in the darkness of her fear. The suspense, the tension, the unbearable weight of humiliation, all seemed to pause for a moment. The door opened wider, and her mother stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room, landing finally on Maya. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Ms. Hardwick's hands trembled slightly. For the first time, she seemed unsure, hesitant. Maya's heart pounded wildly. She clutched her hair, the uneven strands falling awkwardly around her face, and looked at her mother with pleading eyes. The room waited, every student holding their breath. The suspense was unbearable. What would happen next? Would her mother protect her? Would the teacher face consequences? The moment hung like a knife poised in the air. The fear, the shock, and the suspense coiled tightly, leaving everyone in the room suspended in a single, tense heartbeat. Maya had survived the teacher's cruelty, but the real test was about to begin. Maya's mother, Mrs. Collins, stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room with a calm yet powerful intensity. The classroom, once buzzing with whispers and nervous energy, seemed to freeze. Every student held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Ms. Hardwick's hands still clutched the scissors, her posture rigid, but now there was uncertainty in her eyes, a crack in the facade of control she had maintained so flawlessly all morning. Maya, her mother said gently, but firmly, what happened here? Maya's lips trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a faint whisper escaped. She said I broke the rules, and, her voice faltered, thick with tears and fear. Her mother stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder. The touch alone gave Maya a small spark of courage. She tried again, more clearly this time. She shaved my hair, in front of everyone. A murmur ran through the classroom. Students glanced at each other, their eyes wide, disbelief etched into their faces. Some tried to hide small smiles of relief that someone had finally come to stand up for Maya. Others stared, horrified, at the pile of hair on the floor. Ms. Hardwick's expression hardened for a brief second, but then she froze, staring at Mrs. Collins. Shaved your hair? Mrs. Collins echoed, her voice steady but low, carrying authority that filled the room. In front of everyone? She looked at the teacher, her eyes narrowing slightly. Is that your idea of discipline? Ms. Hardwick opened her mouth, as if to speak, but no words came out. She seemed trapped, caught between the expectation of obedience and the sudden presence of someone who clearly would not tolerate injustice. The scissors in her hand felt heavier now, a silent symbol of the power she had misused. Maya's classmates watched silently, captivated. The tension in the room was nearly unbearable. No one moved, no one breathed too loudly. The suspense was thick, wrapping around every heart, making the moments stretch endlessly. Every eye was on the teacher now, waiting for her reaction, wondering how she would respond to the sudden authority of a mother who refused to be ignored. Mrs. Collins took a step closer, her gaze steady on Ms. Hardwick. I am asking you again, she said, her voice calm but firm. Why did you do this to my daughter? The teacher swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly, the scissors now lowering to her side. I was just enforcing the rules, she said finally, her voice weak, faltering. She was breaking the rules. Maya's mother shook her head slowly. Breaking the rules does not mean you humiliate a child. You do not have the right to treat her like this, in front of everyone. Discipline does not include fear or shame. Her eyes swept across the classroom, making it clear that everyone, including the students, should listen and understand the gravity of the moment. For a long moment, no one spoke. Maya stood frozen, tears still wet on her cheeks, clutching the uneven strands of her hair. She felt a strange mixture of fear, relief, and hope. Fear for what might still happen, relief that her mother was here, and hope that maybe, just maybe, things would change. Ms. Hardwick's lips pressed together tightly, her face pale. She tried to assert some control, but it was weak. I I only meant to teach her a lesson, she said, her voice now almost small. I didn't want to hurt her. Mrs. Collins' eyes softened slightly, but the firmness in her voice remained. You did hurt her. You humiliated her in front of the entire class. And that is not acceptable. You will take responsibility for this. The classroom remained tense, every student sensing the weight of the moment. Some of Maya's friends began to whisper encouragements, others looked away, overwhelmed by the intensity of the confrontation. Maya felt her chest loosen slightly, the tight knot of fear inside her beginning to unravel. Her mother had not only protected her in that instant but had also given her a sense of power she hadn't felt before, a reassurance that she was not alone. Ms. Hardwick finally stepped back, her posture sagging slightly. The scissors clattered softly onto the teacher's desk. The authority she had wielded so confidently that morning now seemed fragile, vulnerable. She was exposed, just as Maya had been earlier, but in a different way. Her mask of control had cracked in front of witnesses who would never forget it. Mrs. Collins placed a hand on Maya's back and gently guided her toward a seat, ensuring she felt safe and supported. It's going to be okay, she whispered. Maya nodded, still shaking but feeling a small sense of relief. She dared to glance at her classmates, many of whom now looked at her with sympathy and respect. The dynamic of the room had shifted completely. The principal arrived moments later, summoned by a student who had been too frightened to speak up earlier. Mrs. Collins explained the situation calmly but firmly. The principal's eyes widened as he surveyed the scene, the pile of hair on the floor, the trembling teacher, and the relieved yet still scared students. It was clear that this incident had gone far beyond normal discipline. Ms. Hardwick tried to explain herself again, but the presence of Maya's mother made her words hollow. She had lost the control she thought she had. Every student in the room now understood that her authority had limits, and that crossing those limits could no longer be tolerated. As the tension began to ease slightly, Maya realized something important. She had survived the fear, the humiliation, and the suspense of the morning. She had a mother who would fight for her, and she had friends who cared. And perhaps, most importantly, she had herself, the courage to face something terrifying and come out the other side, even if trembling and scared. But even in this moment of relief, a small, lingering tension remained. The teacher's coldness had not disappeared entirely. The room was quiet, but the memory of fear hung in the air like a shadow. Maya knew this was only the beginning of a story that would stay with her, and with everyone in the room, for a long time. The suspense was not fully over. Questions lingered in the air. How would the school handle Ms. Hardwick? What consequences would follow? And most importantly, how would Maya rebuild her sense of safety in a place she had once loved but now associated with fear? For Maya, the answers were not clear, but she felt a growing strength inside her. A strength she did not know she had until she saw her mother's unwavering gaze. In that moment, she understood that courage was not the absence of fear, it was standing firm, even when fear seemed too heavy to bear. And so, as the students returned to their seats, the classroom slowly returning to order, the story of that morning, the fear, the humiliation, and the mother's decisive intervention, remained vivid in everyone's mind. The suspense had given way to relief, but the lessons and emotions would linger far longer, shaping Maya's understanding of courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what is right. The classroom felt strangely quiet after the confrontation. Students whispered to each other in hushed tones, exchanging glances filled with disbelief and curiosity. Maya sat at her desk, her hair uneven and her heart still racing from the events that had just unfolded. Though her mother's presence had shielded her in the moment, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the remaining strands of her hair, the sense of violation still raw and painful. Outside the classroom walls, rumors began to spread like wildfire. Whispers of what had happened reached students in other grades, and by lunchtime, nearly half the school seemed to know about the incident. "Did you hear what Ms. Hardwick did to Maya?" one student asked. Another nodded, wide-eyed. "I can't believe a teacher would do that." The murmurs grew louder, some laced with fear, others with outrage. Maya overheard fragments as she walked down the hallway, the words cutting her heart like tiny knives. Even as the story traveled, the tension inside Maya continued to build. She couldn't stop replaying the event in her mind, the cold precision of the scissors, the sharp glare of the teacher, the weight of everyone's eyes watching her. She felt embarrassed, exposed, and vulnerable all over again. Each step she took, each whisper she heard, reminded her of the morning's humiliation. But beneath the fear, there was also a flicker of relief. Her mother had stood up for her, and the teacher had been visibly shaken. Back in the classroom, Maya's friends gathered around her, their whispers offering comfort. "You're so brave, Maya," one said softly. "I don't think I could have handled it the way you did." Maya forced a small smile, trying to believe the words. The truth was, she still felt small, powerless, and unsure how she would face school the next day. But her friends' support created a fragile shield around her, a small barrier against the shame and fear. The teacher, Ms. Hardwick, sat silently at her desk, avoiding everyone's gaze. The authority she had wielded so confidently in the morning had crumbled. Every student could see the tension in her body, the unease she tried to hide behind thin excuses. Maya noticed how even other teachers who entered the room exchanged concerned looks, as though silently acknowledging the severity of what had occurred. During the next few classes, Maya struggled to concentrate. Her mind replayed the event over and over, each memory sharper than the last. She thought about the scissors, the way the teacher's hands had moved, and the heavy silence that had followed. Each detail haunted her, but she also remembered her mother's steady gaze, the firmness in her voice, and the way she had never wavered. That memory gave her a small, growing sense of strength, though the fear had not yet fully faded. By the end of the day, the principal called Maya and her mother into his office. The students whispered excitedly as they passed by, some offering sympathetic glances, others staring in awe. Maya's mother stood protectively beside her, a reassuring presence. The principal's expression was serious, almost grave, as he listened to Mrs. Collins recount the incident. It was clear that the situation required careful handling, and Maya's heart swelled with a mix of hope and anxiety, hope that justice would be served, and anxiety over what the school's response would truly be. Even after leaving the office, the rumors continued to swirl. Students speculated about whether Ms. Hardwick would be punished, whether she would apologize, and whether Maya would ever feel safe in that classroom again. Some offered words of encouragement, while others looked on in disbelief, still trying to process the shocking event. The air was thick with suspense, and Maya couldn't help but feel like she was living in the middle of a story that no one could yet resolve. At home, Maya sat quietly in her room, running her fingers through the uneven strands of hair. Her mother knelt beside her, brushing away the tears that had escaped during the day. "I know it was hard," Mrs. Collins said gently. "But you showed courage. You didn't give up. You faced it, and I am so proud of you." Maya tried to smile, feeling a small warmth in her chest. The shame still lingered, but so did the realization that she was not alone, and that someone she loved would always protect her. That night, as Maya lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the incident. The fear, the humiliation, and the suspense of the day replayed in her mind in vivid detail. She wondered how she would face school the next morning, whether the whispers would continue, and if she could ever feel safe in the classroom again. But she also felt a small, growing sense of strength, a quiet resilience that had been awakened by her mother's unwavering support. Even though the day had ended, the story was far from over. The incident had left a mark, not just on Maya, but on everyone who had witnessed it, from her classmates to the teachers. The suspense lingered, the questions remained unanswered, and the emotions were still raw. And Maya, though still shaken, began to understand that courage was not about being fearless, it was about facing fear, standing up for yourself, and finding strength even when everything seemed lost. The next morning, the school buzzed with whispers. Students exchanged quick glances, their curiosity and concern lingering in the hallways. Maya walked through the corridors, her backpack feeling heavier than usual. The uneven strands of her hair brushed against her shoulders, a constant reminder of what had happened. Every step made her heart race. She couldn't help but notice how some students stared at her, others offered sympathetic smiles, and a few avoided eye contact entirely. The suspense of the previous day hung thick in the air, almost tangible. Maya's mother arrived shortly after school began. She was determined, her steps purposeful as she made her way to the principal's office. Today, she was not just a protective mother, she was an advocate, a voice that would ensure her daughter's dignity was restored. The principal, looking serious, greeted her with a nod. "Mrs. Collins, I understand you want to discuss yesterday's events?" he asked, his tone measured, but there was concern in his eyes. "Yes," Mrs. Collins replied firmly. "What happened to my daughter is unacceptable. I want to know what actions will be taken to ensure she is safe and respected in this school." Her gaze was unwavering, steady as a rock. The principal nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He explained that he had already begun an investigation and that Ms. Hardwick would be required to meet with the school board and provide a full explanation of her actions. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, Maya's friends gathered around her, whispering words of encouragement. "Mom is going to make sure everything is okay," one said softly. Maya nodded, but a part of her still felt anxious. She wasn't sure what Ms. Hardwick's response would be, or how the other students would react. The suspense in the air made the room feel heavier, as if everyone could sense that something big was about to unfold. At that moment, the classroom door opened, and Ms. Hardwick entered, her face pale and her steps hesitant. She glanced around the room, avoiding direct eye contact with Maya. The scissors were no longer in her hand, but the memory of her actions still lingered in the eyes of every student. The teacher's authority, once unshakable, now felt fragile and uncertain. Maya's mother appeared in the doorway, her presence commanding attention. The room went silent. Even the students who had been whispering moments ago stopped, sensing the tension rise. "Ms. Hardwick," Mrs. Collins said, her voice calm but firm, "we need to discuss your behavior yesterday. This cannot be ignored." The teacher swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. She opened her mouth, but the words faltered, weak and uncertain. The suspense in the room was almost unbearable. Every eye was on her, waiting to see how she would respond. For the first time, Ms. Hardwick seemed unsure, caught between maintaining her position and facing the consequences of her actions. The principal stepped forward, adding his authority to the room. "Ms. Hardwick, your actions yesterday were inappropriate and have caused significant distress. We will conduct a full review and determine the necessary steps to ensure this does not happen again." His words were clear, firm, and left no room for argument. The tension in the room shifted slightly, the balance of power tilting away from the teacher. Maya watched silently, her heart pounding. She felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Relief that her mother had intervened, that the principal was taking action, and that she was no longer alone. Fear that the situation might still escalate, that her classmates' whispers might continue, and that the memory of humiliation would remain. The suspense, though slightly eased, still gripped her tightly. Ms. Hardwick finally spoke, her voice low and uncertain. I understand. I will cooperate fully with the review." Her gaze flickered toward Maya, then quickly away. The teacher's hesitation and uncertainty made the students feel a strange mixture of satisfaction and continued tension. The suspense was not entirely gone, it had transformed into a quiet, watchful energy, as everyone waited to see what the final outcome would be. Maya's mother guided her to a seat near the front, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered softly. "We will make sure you are safe, and that you are treated with respect from now on." Maya nodded, feeling a small spark of hope ignite in her chest. The emotional weight of the past day was still heavy, but she realized that she was not powerless. She had allies, she had her mother, and most importantly, she had her own courage. Throughout the day, students continued to talk quietly about the incident. The rumors spread, yes, but now there was a sense of justice beginning to form. People recognized that the teacher's behavior had been wrong and that Maya's mother had stepped in to correct it. The suspense lingered, but it shifted from fear to anticipation. What would the school decide? What actions would be taken against the teacher? And how would Maya navigate the rest of the school year knowing that this had happened? By the end of the day, a sense of cautious relief settled over Maya. She walked home with her mother, feeling the uneven strands of her hair brushing against her cheeks, but also feeling a growing inner strength. The suspense of what had begun as fear and humiliation had transformed into a sense of hope and empowerment. Maya knew that challenges might still come, but she also knew that she could face them with courage, support, and resilience. That evening, as Maya sat quietly in her room, she reflected on the day. The fear, the tension, and the suspense were still fresh, but they were tempered by the knowledge that she had survived, that justice had begun to take shape, and that her voice, along with her mother's, could create change. The story was far from over, but Maya now understood that standing up for herself, even in the face of fear, could make all the difference. The next few days at Maplewood Elementary carried a tense energy. Students whispered quietly in hallways, stealing glances at Maya as she walked by. Some offered kind smiles, others averted their eyes, unsure how to act after witnessing the incident. The school had become a place of hushed conversations, and the suspense from the morning of the haircut still lingered like a shadow. Inside the principal's office, Ms. Hardwick faced a formal review with the school board. Her posture was rigid, but her face betrayed a mix of fear and uncertainty. She had always prided herself on being strict, but now her actions were under scrutiny. Witnesses had recounted the event, and statements from students, including some who had initially been too frightened to speak up, painted a clear picture of what had happened. The room was filled with authority, questioning her judgment and methods. The suspense of the outcome was palpable, even for those who weren't in the room. Back in the classroom, Maya felt a strange mixture of relief and nervousness. The other students treated her differently now, not with pity, but with respect. Whispers of admiration ran through her friends. "You were so brave," one said quietly. "I don't know if I could have stayed calm like that." Another nodded, eyes wide. "I'm glad your mom was here. I would have been terrified." Maya smiled faintly, realizing that even though her hair was uneven, her courage had made a bigger impact than she ever imagined. When the principal returned to the classroom to speak with Ms. Hardwick in private, the tension in the room intensified. Every student sat quietly, watching the exchange through the small glass panel in the office door. The suspense was thick. Even though the teacher was no longer holding scissors, her authority had diminished, replaced by uncertainty and the weight of consequences. By the end of the week, the school had made its decision. Ms. Hardwick would be formally reprimanded and required to attend professional counseling and training on appropriate student discipline. She would also meet individually with each affected student to apologize and rebuild trust. Though the punishment was measured, it carried the unmistakable message: fear and humiliation were never acceptable in a classroom. For Maya, this resolution brought a mix of emotions. Relief washed over her, tempered by lingering trauma from the event. The humiliation she had felt in front of her classmates could not simply vanish, but knowing that justice had been done offered a quiet comfort. Her mother remained a constant source of support, helping her process her feelings and reinforcing that courage was more powerful than fear. Over the next few days, Maya noticed subtle changes in how her peers treated her. Some who had been hesitant now approached her, offering small gestures of friendship and encouragement. Others still whispered, but now the words carried curiosity or admiration rather than judgment. The suspense of the days following the incident had shifted from fear to a sense of anticipation. How would the rest of the school year unfold, and what new challenges might arise? Maya began to reclaim her sense of normalcy. She focused on her studies, slowly rebuilding her confidence. She realized that courage wasn't about never feeling fear, but about facing it despite the trembling hands and racing heart. She learned that standing up for oneself, and having someone who would fight for you, could change the entire narrative of a terrifying situation. The memory of the haircut still haunted her. Each strand of hair that had fallen to the floor carried the weight of the morning's shock and humiliation. But over time, that memory transformed from pure fear into a lesson in resilience. Maya started to understand that while fear could not always be avoided, it could be faced, and even overcome, with support, courage, and determination. Her mother continued to be her guide, reinforcing the importance of speaking up, standing strong, and trusting her instincts. Together, they reflected on the events, finding meaning in the struggle and strength in the outcome. Maya felt her confidence slowly returning, her spirit healing even as she acknowledged the emotional scars left by the experience. Even the teacher, Ms. Hardwick, seemed to change. Though her strict demeanor remained, there was a subtle shift in her behavior. She spoke more carefully, listened more attentively, and avoided actions that could humiliate students in the future. The suspense of what had seemed like unending fear had now given way to a cautious respect, a fragile but important balance restored within the classroom. By the end of the week, Maya walked through the halls with a quiet pride. She had survived a terrifying ordeal, faced humiliation, and emerged stronger. The suspense of the past days had transformed into a story of courage and resilience. She realized that fear was temporary, but strength, once discovered, could last a lifetime. The following weeks passed slowly, but each day brought Maya a small sense of strength. Though the memory of the morning when her hair had been shaved still lingered, it no longer controlled her thoughts. Instead, she began to see the courage she had shown, the bravery it took to face fear, and the importance of having someone by her side who would never let injustice go unchecked. Her mother remained a guiding presence, helping Maya process each feeling, each moment of doubt, and each pang of lingering embarrassment. Maya's friends continued to support her, their gestures small but meaningful. A quiet word of encouragement, a comforting pat on the shoulder, or a shared laugh reminded her that she was not alone. Slowly, the whispers and curious glances in the hallways began to shift. Students who had once stared with disbelief now watched with admiration or respect. Maya realized that facing fear, and coming out the other side, could change how others saw her, but more importantly, it changed how she saw herself. One afternoon, Maya sat at her desk, thinking about the events that had unfolded. The scissors, the fear, the humiliation, they had seemed insurmountable at first. But now, looking back, she saw them differently. She saw the strength it had taken to endure, the resilience she had discovered, and the unwavering support of her mother. Every heartbeat that had raced in fear had also carried courage. Every tear she had shed had also marked the beginning of growth. Ms. Hardwick, though still strict, had become noticeably more cautious in her actions. She apologized to students individually and worked to rebuild trust, though the lessons she had inadvertently taught the class were already written into their minds. Respect, empathy, and the understanding that cruelty could never be justified had become lessons far stronger than any she could have imposed with rules or discipline. Maya observed these changes with a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that sometimes courage could spark transformation even in those who had seemed unyielding. Maya's mother sat beside her one evening, reflecting on the journey together. "You see, Maya," she said gently, "fear is not permanent. Courage is. And when you face fear with honesty and strength, it grows inside you. It doesn't matter what others try to do, it's how you respond that counts." Maya nodded, feeling the truth in her words. She realized that courage wasn't just about the moment of confrontation, it was also about the days and weeks that followed, the choices to stand tall and trust herself even when others might doubt her. The suspense of what had seemed like a nightmare had transformed into a story of empowerment. Maya thought about her classmates, many of whom had learned lessons from the incident as well. They had witnessed injustice, fear, and accountability, and the experience had left them more aware of the impact of their actions and the actions of those in authority. The echoes of that day would remain, but they were no longer rooted in fear, they were reminders of resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for what is right. Maya began to smile more confidently, to speak up in class, and to trust herself again. The uneven strands of hair, once a symbol of humiliation, now reminded her of her strength. She realized that fear could not define her, but courage could. She understood that life would bring challenges, unfairness, and moments of fear, but with resilience, support, and self-belief, she could face anything. The classroom, once a place of dread, became a space of learning and growth. Students respected one another more, understanding that fear and cruelty were never acceptable. Teachers, too, were reminded that their actions carried weight and that empathy mattered just as much as discipline. The suspense that had gripped the school began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of balance and awareness. Maya reflected quietly on the journey, understanding that the events of that day had shaped her in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. She felt stronger, wiser, and more confident than before. The fear that had once seemed so overwhelming had transformed into courage, the humiliation into resilience, and the suspense into lessons that would stay with her for life. And as she looked at herself in the mirror, touching the uneven strands of hair that would soon grow back, Maya smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. She knew that no matter what challenges came her way, she had the inner strength to face them, the courage to stand tall, and the support of those who loved her. The suspense of the past had given way to clarity, hope, and the quiet power of resilience, a lesson not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed her story. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, the tension that had once filled Maplewood Elementary began to fade. Maya walked through the halls with her head held a little higher, a quiet confidence growing with each step. The uneven strands of hair that had once been a symbol of humiliation were now a reminder of her courage, of the moment she had faced fear and survived. She had learned that true strength came not from avoiding danger, but from confronting it with determination and grace. Her mother continued to be her anchor, guiding her through the emotions that still lingered. "You've grown so much, Maya," Mrs. Collins said one evening as they reviewed homework together. "Not just because of what happened, but because of how you handled it. You stood up, even when it was scary, and you didn't let fear control you." Maya smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She realized that courage wasn't just for one moment, it was a habit, a choice made every day to face life with honesty and strength. Back at school, Ms. Hardwick's demeanor had changed. Though she remained strict, there was now a level of respect in her interactions with students. The incident had left its mark, teaching her that discipline should never cross the line into humiliation. Students, too, had learned lessons of empathy, justice, and the power of speaking up. The classroom, once a place of fear, had slowly transformed into a space where students felt safer and more understood. Maya found herself helping younger students, encouraging them to speak up if they felt wronged, to trust their instincts, and to know that they were never alone. She became a quiet leader among her peers, her confidence growing with each act of kindness and courage. The suspense of the past, the fear, the whispers, the uncertainty, had turned into a story of resilience that inspired everyone around her. One afternoon, as she walked home with her mother, Maya reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the pain, and the humiliation had once seemed unbearable. But now, she saw them as lessons, steps on the path that had made her stronger. She realized that courage was contagious, that standing up for yourself could inspire others, and that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine through. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "You've turned a terrible day into something powerful, Maya. Remember, strength isn't about never being afraid, it's about moving forward even when you are." Maya nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride. She knew that the events of that day would stay with her forever, but they no longer frightened her. Instead, they reminded her of who she was, brave, resilient, and full of hope. By the end of the school year, Maya had transformed in ways that were visible and invisible. She spoke with more confidence, walked with her head held high, and treated others with empathy and understanding. The scars, both emotional and physical, were slowly healing, but the lessons she had learned remained permanent. She had faced fear, confronted injustice, and emerged stronger than ever before. The story of that day, the teacher's cruelty, the mother's intervention, and Maya's courage, became more than just a moment in time. It became a lesson for the entire school, a reminder that no one should endure humiliation, that standing up for what is right matters, and that courage can turn even the darkest moments into sources of strength. Maya smiled as she looked at her reflection, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known before. She knew that life would bring challenges, but she was ready to face them with resilience, hope, and the knowledge that she was never truly alone. The suspense, fear, and tension of that day had transformed into a powerful story of courage, justice, and love, a story that would stay with her and inspire others for a lifetime. And as the sun set behind the school, casting a golden glow over the playground, Maya walked forward with confidence, leaving behind fear and embracing the strength that had always been inside her. She had survived, she had grown, and she had discovered the quiet, unwavering power of resilience.